Hi, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the NAHT's online webinar. And we're joined today by Stephen George, who, as if by magic, has just appeared next to me. Today we're looking at communicating above and beyond, which is the title we've been built at. And I think Stephen's going to focus on working with the media in good times and bad. And certainly we're in bad times at the moment. It feels really quite grim. And I don't think anyone's had a break since February. So we're conscious of the stress everyone's under, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. And I hope it's informative and helpful to you. I'll just say a little bit about Stephen and a little bit about housekeeping, and then I'll leave you in his capable hands, if that's okay. So Stephen is NHT's head of, I've got press and media, but it may be press and external affairs. I'm sure I'll be corrected. I'm sure there's a difference between the two, and perhaps we'll find out what the difference is today. Stephen's been with the NHT since 2014. And before that, he spent 15 years as a senior BBC journalist, working on shows like, if I can call them shows, like Radio 4, The World Service, and the News at 6, the News at 10. And I won't spoil it if he's going to use it. He's got an interesting work experience story we may come to later. Stephen is a chair of governors at a small primary school in Kent, where he has two daughters. I don't think they're at that school necessarily, but he has his finger on the pulse of the education world as a parent as well as an NHT employee. If you see an NHT press statement, chances are Stephen's fingers will be all over it, and he'll probably have written it himself, probably up till 2 in the morning doing so. So he has quite an interesting, stressful time of it at the moment. And he particularly takes a role in looking after any NHT members in difficulties with the press. So he's got a cape somewhere, and he may even bring it out later and wear it. So today we're looking at working with the media in good times and bad. Stephen, I know you ran this back in the start of July. So the world has moved on a lot in those last 6 months. He'll be updating. So if you saw it back in July, hopefully you get an update and learn something on that. So just a few housekeeping notes from me, and then I'll pass you on. We record these and we put them on YouTube. So if you missed it or you want to recommend it to a friend, we'll send you the link so you can find it there. Stephen's got a slide presentation, so we can share that with you at the end. You will see on the sidebar, if you've got it open, a list of participants, so you can see the name that you've chosen to be identified as, and everyone else's. We can't do anything about that, so you kind of, that's the name you will be known by. We'll be having a poll at the end, and just so we get some feedback. And I suppose the main thing is there is a chat function at the bottom. You know how to use it by now, don't you? There's the chat function, so if you want to put questions either to us or chat amongst yourselves, or for us to pick up with Stephen at the end, please use the chat function to do so. But that's probably all I need to say for now. So I shall pass you over to Stephen. And Stephen, communicating above and beyond.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Andy. Good morning to you all. And Andy set up a few expectations there of me, and which I will try to fulfill and try not to disappoint. If you do feel like putting your cameras on, then please do, because I may try and ask one or two of you a few questions as we go through, just to make the session a little bit interactive if we can. So do feel free to show me your own bookcases if you have any. Obviously mine have been very carefully curated with a mixture of political tomes and photos of my family, so no one could possibly criticize me if I ended up on the telly in that way. Anyway, it's lovely to have so many of you here. Very shortly I'm just going to nip into a presentation. I've got one or two videos to play you and some examples of media work that NHT's been involved in recent times. So I will just attempt some technological activity at this point, and let's go over to here and share this screen, and then hopefully you guys will get that as well. Okay. Just, would you let me know, Andy, if my presentation's showing on the screen, please?
I was just going to come on and say that. Yeah, it is, but it's not on the slideshow setting yet. So
yeah,
It's on it's on the preview, but we can see it fine.
Okay, hold on a second. Let's go for that. There we go. Hopefully that's full screen for all of you now.
It is.
Lovely. Okay, so welcome along, and it's great to have so many of you here. Obviously, when you're communicating with the media, there's a couple of different scenarios, aren't there? There's the times where you want to do it, and that presents its own challenges, because quite often, if it's something that you want to do, it's an event where you've got something positive to report, and actually not often are news outlets interested in positive stories, so that presents its own challenges. And then sometimes, and more often recently, you're communicating with the media in bad times, actually. There may be something that's gone wrong at your school, there may be some sort of crisis situation that you're involved in. Now, goodness knows, the pandemic has kind of redefined, hasn't it, the notion of what a crisis situation might be. Typically, in years past, that might be a broken boiler or a snow day or something like that, where you may have to communicate. I don't know about you, but certainly in the school that I'm involved in, we pray for the chaos of a snow day actually right now, because that would be relatively straightforward to sort out compared to what we've got facing us at the moment. But there are a couple of different scenarios you might find yourself in, and in a moment I'll ask one or two of you if you'd be happy to volunteer to tell me of any dealings with the media that you had yourself already, because one of the things I'd like you to take away from this session is, in fact, the idea that your skill set as school leaders is very good fit for the challenges of working with the media. You're brilliant communicators. You're terrific at explaining things to people in terms that they can understand, and obviously honesty and integrity are key parts of the role that you perform. But so a lot of the school leaders I speak to are people who say, oh, I couldn't possibly do anything in the media. It's not my bag. It's not my thing. But actually, once you dip your toe in the water and do it, it's really not as terrifying as it seems. And actually, your skill set is very common to the ones that you would find useful if you're doing media work. So I hope this gives you some confidence too. But the main thing, of course, when faced with a microphone or a camera screen, is not to panic. I'm going to attempt, with a little bit of a bit more technical know-how, just to play you a clip now of Paul Whiteman, NAHT's General Secretary, being interviewed a few days ago on BBC Breakfast TV. And if any of you are not on mute at this stage, then that would be a good one, I think, to put yourselves on mute just for now. So let's have a look at that. Hopefully it's that one there. Here we go. Let's have a little look at this.
Who don't have any access to laptops are designated as vulnerable children. And I suppose this extends the point you were making, because there is a balance, isn't there? Yes, admittedly, that digital learning isn't the only learning that they will benefit from. But in order to keep them learning, if that is the case, they are allowed into school. Head teachers around the country, teachers are now making that balance, aren't they, between safety and the safety of the kids in terms of making sure they have some kind of foundation for the future.
Absolutely, and school leaders and their teams are the most committed to having children in school. But if the government's made the decision that to stop the transfer in communities, that the access to school should be restricted, opening it up further and further and further is working against that safety measure that government's putting in place. And now school leaders and their teams are in the really difficult position of having to make judgments around that they're not equipped to make. Now, what we're going to have to do is have some calm in education and start working together rather than accusing each other of failure. However we've got to this situation, we have a moment right now where the government can work with educators and can work with the profession and benefit from their educational expertise about how we best keep education going for children during these really difficult times under the new restrictions that the government has brought forward in the blink of an eye. So what I'm really appealing for is two things: for calm amongst families as well, a little bit of patience to allow schools to get organised. Remember, they've had no time at all to get organised since the last decision, and some patience from government. You know, accusing schools and bringing legal action forward and saying in the chamber of the House in England yesterday that you can complain if the school isn't doing what you want and complain to Ofsted. It really isn't trusting teachers and putting trust in our educators, which is what we need right now.
Yeah. Okay. Good to talk to you. Paul Whiteman, General Secretary of the National Association of...
So there we go. Hopefully you all managed to see that. So what was going on there with Paul on that one? Well, you know, he was very clear in his message. He was unruffled in his presentation, and he knew what audience he was speaking to as well. So we'd prepared a lot with him before that interview. So I would suggest that preparation is a really good thing that you want to do before you go and do an interview. Definitely make sure you know what you want to say. I'll come on to later a little bit of the way that you might handle yourself in that way specifically. But obviously, Paul, as the spokesperson for the whole of NAHT, carries all of our members' hopes and fears on his shoulders. And whenever he goes on the television, he always tries to faithfully represent what it is that members are telling him right now and what he's hearing. So how does that transfer to you? Well, it's really about making sure that you're speaking on behalf of your community in a way that is truthful and is honest and represents the views of the people around you. So I'll go back to the presentation, and I'll just show you the next couple of slides because I hope those will be useful. Let's go to that one there. There we go. So let's have a look at some golden rules. All of this information, by the way, will be shared. I'll send you the presentation, which has got all the links for the videos in it as well. And of course, NHT does have a couple of advice documents on dealing with the media, both in crisis communications terms and also in better times. And those are available on the website, and those will be sent over to you as well at the end of this session. So if it's going wrong, ask for help. You are, as NHT members, you're entitled to ask for help from me and the NHT press office. It's surprising to me how many members don't realise that actually that's one of the biggest things we're there for. So if you need to get in touch with us because you're worried about something, then do. Ask around your community of leaders and perhaps with your governors or your senior leadership team, and stop and think and make a plan with them about what you'll do if you find yourself in a difficult situation. The one thing I've learned when helping leaders in situations where things are challenging is once you've made that plan, stick to the plan, because you are great thinkers, you're intelligent people, you make plans all the time. So use that plan, stick to it, be confident about it, and then you're in a position to communicate what needs to go out to the wider community. And there's just three real kind of golden rules in terms of the don'ts at this stage in terms of how you're communicating. Don't blame anyone for the problems. That never goes down particularly well. Don't dodge the issue if there's something that is something that you need to talk about. And of course, as I said before, don't panic. Now, there's some important questions that you can ask yourself actually at this stage. And I always think that's a good way of starting off, is ask yourself some intelligent questions. Work with your little group of trusted colleagues to put your plan together. Is anyone in danger because of something you or your team have done or not done? Obviously, if that's the case, then that's a moment to act, isn't it? Have you or your school done anything wrong? You may not have done. The media inquiry coming your way might actually not be something that is relevant to you or anything that you've got to answer for. And in which case, have you got anything to apologise for? I think it's a really important thing to bear that in mind. But of course, it's always, how often have we seen people come unstuck because they don't apologise early enough for something that's gone wrong? So really think about that. And don't forget, there may be the necessity to take some legal advice. And of course, you in your trust or your local authority, you may have the option to do that. And of course, as well as part of NHT services to members, there's legal advice and protection available too. And a key one here in a crisis situation is, does the situation require or arise from pupil exclusion or staff suspension? I think that, for me, in my experience of all the cases that I've dealt with, that's a big one where you really need to make sure that you're on your game and able to communicate effectively with everyone around you. Here's an interesting one that not everyone considers. Because you're the school leader, you think, oh, it's got to be me. I've got to stand up and front this one. But who should speak on behalf of the school isn't always you, actually. And I would say that it's at least worth considering whether it's your chair of governors who ought to be speaking on behalf of the school, or your MAT CEO, or even someone from your local authority, actually, who can take some of that heat off you if necessary. Is it really a matter that the school should be commenting on? I tend to think that our natural inclination would be to comment if we were asked to, because we're polite and we're grown-ups. But actually, it may be something that refers to perhaps something that happened in the school's past, or something that a previous pupil has done that is negative. And in which case, you would be perfectly legitimate in turning down a request from the media by saying, well, that's not something for us to comment on at the moment. And again, another takeaway for you here, I would suggest that it is not always the case that you say yes to a media inquiry. You're under no obligation to speak to the media ever, to be honest. Although it feels like you might want to, or that you are, be very circumspect about that, and take some advice if you're unsure. Classically, actually, in a difficult situation, you'll need to communicate with staff, parents, and other people first. Your first duty is to keep them informed about what's going on if you find yourself in a crisis situation. And obviously, you need to consider what information you're allowed to share and what needs to remain private. Some of this might seem very obvious to you, but actually what I'm trying to get across is, when you find yourself in a crisis situation, more often than not, it's one that you perhaps haven't considered before, or because school life is very busy, you haven't always taken the time to sit down and think, okay, what is my process to deal with a crisis situation? So another takeaway for you, I'd suggest, is actually have a crisis comms plan that you can take off the shelf. NHT has one. I've done a model communications policy, for example, that you can use. And again, that material will be shared at the end of this. But I think it's one of those things where, if you've got even a back of an envelope sort of plan about what you would do in a crisis situation, just in the back of your mind, that when one comes along, you're not having to invent it from scratch. I think it is worth just sort of working out what the worst thing that could happen might be. I think that's another thing that catches large organizations out sometimes, where they don't think it through into this sort of potential second and third phases of what might happen. I suppose that's about coming back to the idea of apologising early rather than necessarily pretending that there's nothing to see here, and then only later does it transpire that there was a difficulty that really you should have been a bit more honest about. And by that same token, does what you say now have an impact on anything else in a day or a week or a month's time? These are just some sensible questions to ask yourself when you initially get a small group, perhaps of your SLT or your extended leadership team together, just to work through it. There are, I've found, some common mistakes that people make when talking to the media in difficult circumstances. And these three things I've spoken to leaders about very often, and all the time. I'm struck by how relevant they are. So the first thing, I guess, in a crisis situation, and again, think about how many institutions and individuals publicly you're aware of who've dealt with bad press really badly. I bet you they're making some of these common mistakes. Don't think about how to protect your reputation. The best way of maintaining that in the long term is by doing the right thing in the immediate term. I firmly believe that, and I think you're more often than not going to keep yourself safe by doing it that way. Don't believe that a quote in the media or an interview will help the record, set the record straight. That's often a gambit of journalists who might come to you and say, well, this is your opportunity, Mr. X or Mrs. X, to say, to put your side of the story, but you don't have any control over that. So I wouldn't take that opportunity unless it was necessarily something you felt really confident in. And here's another thing, and again, it's kind of counterintuitive actually. You don't have to persuade journalists that you're right. You just have to get your message across. I think that's something that politicians are very good at, and goodness knows I wouldn't advise you to be more like a politician, especially not the lot we've got at the moment. But what I'm saying is it's quite difficult to win an argument when whatever's been recorded potentially with you in an interview you might do could be chopped up and edited and used any which way you might see. You know, again, think about the television and how often you've seen people's views truncated into little 20-second clips on the television or the radio. You're not going to win an argument in 20 seconds. The most important thing is to get your message across. So if it's a case where there's something negative about your school, it really is about making sure that you tell parents what you're doing to put the situation right, or what action you're taking to make sure that your pupils can continue to learn or are as safe as possible. So some do's and don'ts for you, and again, jot these down if you want to, but you don't have to because they're coming in the handout that is associated with this webinar. Be really clear and unambiguous. Use everyday language and avoid sounding too corporate. I don't think those things go down terribly well. I would advise you to think like a parent. Most of us are actually anyway. What do they want to hear and what do they need to know? And what is it that could get in the way of them understanding the really important message that you're trying to get across? It's really important to address the issue directly. And there are a few other do's on this page, but stop talking or writing when you've made your point. That's an absolute do. You know, how often will you find yourself trying to add a little bit extra to a sentence because you haven't thought about how you wanted to end it? Equally, and here's an interesting thing that journalists do, and I used to do it when I was a reporter, I would ask a question of someone and I would wait for them to give me their answer, and they'd finish speaking, and I would almost always not jump in straight away with my next question. And the reason I used to do that was because it's natural for polite people like you and I to want to fill a silence. So if there is one, don't jump in first. If you've finished saying what you want to say, stop. You don't need to fill that silence. That's not your job. Good idea to be wary. Remember, a journalist wants your scoop, not your friendship. And also, stick to the messages and examples you prepared and rehearsed. Don't go off script. Don't extemporize. Don't add in more detail than you've agreed with yourself as much as anything else that you'll use. Think back to what I was saying in a previous slide about what you may or may not be able to say. It's really important to make sure that you don't say more than you should in some circumstances. So don't use 5 sentences when 2 will do. I need to take my own advice on that one sometimes. Don't use jargon or hide behind regulations. That never looks good. Don't criticize parents, ever. I know it's tempting, and I know there will be scenarios where the parental angle is critical, but you have to try to find another way of talking about what parents might be doing that's negative. I've got some tips about that later on. There's no need, if there is some sort of slur or allegation that's been printed or reported, for you to repeat that when you talk about it. So, for example, if someone says, oh, you closed your school too early because of snow or something like that, you might say, there is no need for you to preface that as if you're answering a kind of comprehension type question. You don't, if you're in a negative situation, no need to mention your school or the institution in your 20-second clip, because someone will do that for you, and why draw more attention to it. Sometimes you might be on and asked about other organisations or things that might have happened. Perhaps, you know, other schools locally might have done something different to you, or your local authority might have made a particular controversial choice. You don't speak on behalf of them, and I would always urge you to avoid being drawn into that and not to deviate from what you've agreed to say publicly. You may have to put together statements on behalf of the school, and these are some of the potential scenarios you might face. I mean, some of those are obvious. I haven't even put coronavirus on there actually, but the point being, have a little look at that list in your own time, and again, just think about how you would do that without going off script or trying to dream stuff off the top of your head without thinking it through with your team. So I hope that section at least has given you a bit of an idea of what to do if you find yourself in challenging circumstances. And there's a whole NHT piece of advice and guidance on that one. I've got a little video to play you actually, which I really like, and I think I'm going to have to flip to another screen just to play it properly for you. But it's a company that we use called Electric Airways, and they do a lot of media training for really big companies, and we've used them at NHT once or twice. The gentleman you can see on the screen there runs the company, and he they have produced quite a lot of videos actually that are really useful for media training, and a lot of it is free to watch on their website. So again, you'll get the link to that one, but I'll just find him on my other screen a second, and where are we? On here, and I'll just play you this little video and see what you think. That's Paul from before. Here we go. Here's Andrew.
How can you apologise and sound like you really mean it? All too often, apologies strike the wrong tone. For example, I'm sorry if I've offended anyone. This sounds more like, I'm sorry that you're so stupid or so sensitive, you get offended. The rules for an effective apology are: be swift, so it doesn't seem like it's being dragged out of you. It also shows that you know the difference between right and wrong. Be sincere. Your audience will always know if you're not being genuine, and that won't be helped if you read your apology from a piece of paper. Be succinct. Trying to explain or qualify your apology reduces its effectiveness. And finally, say what you're going to do to fix the problem. A sincere apology should express regret, remorse, and repentance. We could do a lot worse than remember the wise words of our parents. Say you're sorry and mean it.
So there we are. I hope that's a useful little exercise. So this website, by the way, is really, really great. Lots and lots of ideas for media training. I'm going to play another video from here a little later on. But while I've got this screen up, actually, I'll just play you a bit of our president, Ruth Davis, being interviewed by 5 Live not so long ago. I think it was just around the time, actually, that the government had announced the latest set of restrictions on schools. So let's have a little listen to this. She gets quite a hard time here, but she does really well, I think, dealing with the questioning. So let's have a look and a listen on this one.
Actually, there are 500,000 or so teachers in state-funded education in England alone. Then when you add support staff, teaching assistants, all the rest of it, you're talking about 1 million or so workers, aren't you, in state-funded education in England alone. So when some listeners get in touch and say, well, just vaccinate people who work in schools, it could be some time.
Oh, undoubtedly, this is a massive undertaking. This is a huge programme, and it won't happen without a strategic plan. And we just feel that the current haphazard approach to decision-making of this government, which has seen it lurch from one bad idea to another, just has to stop. Enough is enough. And we need to be allowed to work with them to come up with a plan that enables the rollout of the significant programmes which will make a difference to our learners. Otherwise, we will just lurch from one crisis to another. Enough of the reactive decision making. Let's now work together for a strategic plan to get our learners back to school as safely and securely in a sustained manner as possible.
Is your advice the same for the head teachers of secondary schools as it is for primary schools? Because virtually everything we've been told by the chief medical officer up until very recently is that the virus is relatively low risk for primary school children, and that there is no greater risk for teachers than any other profession in that context. Secondary schools, trickier, I grant you, but primary schools, not so much.
Well, that's interesting. You should bring that one up, because you will notice that in our legal action, where we did the pre-action that we've taken with the government, we are asking for the evidence which just justifies the distinction they're currently drawing between primary and secondary schools. You're right. It does seem to indicate that the risk is greater in secondary schools, but the evidence isn't actually there yet. And we're asking them to provide us the detail that they are working from.
What about the other side of the coin? Because this will be of huge concern, of course, to any of your members, any head teacher in the land. When you look at Ofsted's head in England saying we must not furlough our children's futures, we know their attainment, their mental health, their well-being, children from poorer households in particular being disproportionately affected by school closure, damaging these children's life chances. And then you get into areas of Ofsted's head talking about risks of abuse, neglect, exploitation being raised as well. That all has to be a massive part of the mix of decision making.
It certainly does. It certainly does. And without doubt, these children and these learners are best served back in schools. But that won't happen without a safe plan. As I said, we cannot simply lurch from one bad idea to another. We need to have these children back in school. But in order for that to occur, we need to be clear that the plans we're drawing up with tally with the current scientific advice and evidence. Let's be clear that on December the 22nd, SAGE, government's own scientific advisors, recommended that schools needed to close because without closing, the R rate would soar above 1. Now, we can't simply wishing that not to be the case won't make it thus. We have to take that by the scruff of the neck and think, right, long term, what can we do?
So I get all of this. I get all of this. So you're talking about the medium term and you're talking about the longer term. We are in the extreme short term at this moment, aren't we? With schools due to go back tomorrow. What is your kind of headline message in respect of the real short term? You've got all these schools in London, parts of the southeast that are definitely going to be closed. What about heads in other parts of the country that are looking at this saying, well, why are we any different? You know, and look at the National Education Union yesterday, who was saying what's good for London should be good for the rest of the country. What's your advice to head teachers who've got that on their mind?
Absolutely. And one of the other bits of evidence that we're asking for through our legal action is the information that justifies the geographical distinctions. Look, it's not us that has made this panic. It's not head teachers that have caused this panic. It's the government's lack of decision making towards the end of the last term. It's the lack of the ability.
But what if you don't get the data? What are you going to do? What are you saying to your members about tomorrow?
We desperately need. These are decisions that only the government can make. We are reliant on the government to give us this information. We can't proceed without it. As I said, wishing the virus away simply isn't going to work.
So there we go. I was really interested by that interview. It's a toughie. We'd certainly call it that. And I think that Ruth acquitted herself really well there. And what did she do that was really good? Well, she stuck to her message. She wasn't intimidated by some pretty direct questioning from the journalists, and actually, in many ways, she was very skillfully agreeing with what the questions were, even though they were quite tough ones, and flipping it back onto government. And I hope you would agree that in both of the examples that I've shown you, Paul, our General Secretary, and Ruth, our President this year, representing NHT's members as faithfully as you would expect, and defending us from any criticism that comes along. I'm just going to go into a few other bits of my presentation for you. There will be some time for questions at the end, if you would like to if you'd like to ask any. Let's have a little move along here. So I do apologise. Hang on a second. There we go. So how do we make the most of those opportunities? You've just seen Ruth being interviewed on Radio 5 there. Again, here's some things that she did and that I helped her with in preparation for that interview. And I would do that with any of you if you wanted my help. We prepared what she was going to say. We had a little bit of a run through beforehand. Now here's the thing. Although it's two people talking, which essentially is a conversation, this is a presentation. Do you remember me saying a little while ago that it's not your job to try to win the argument? It's your job to get the point across. And even in good times, that's true. You know, what's the main message that you want to convey? That your school has done an amazing job for pupils by being much more proactive than the government has been about providing internet-enabled devices, for example, all the work that you've done in your wider community throughout the pandemic to show that you've gone above and beyond what could reasonably be expected of your school and your team. You can showcase that, and sometimes it might feel like a conversation, but actually really it's you presenting that message that you think is the most important. Being ready is a really key thing, so make sure you're settled down. These days, it's not very often that a camera crew will come anywhere near your school right now, although they sometimes still do. Most of the time it's about finding yourself a spot where you're comfortable in doing an interview. Then you're in control of the situation as much as you can be. And goodness knows, I just want to say, anybody is capable of doing a really, really great interview, and anybody is capable of doing a really, really bad one. And it's all good. You know, the significance of that, the consequences of that are usually pretty small. So I would urge you to sort of not have too much fear about that. As long as you've done all the right things, you won't have anything to reproach yourself for. Just to help you prepare, by the way, in terms of how you might get ready for an interview, and I asked myself and I asked Andy some of these questions when I was getting ready for this webinar. So there's some who, what, when, where, why questions, and we know those from teaching anyway, don't we? You know, which program is the interview for? You might need to think about the audience then and how you speak. You know, if it's a very intellectual one or a very mainstream one. What do they really want to know about? It's perfectly legitimate for you to ask that question. Where should I look? Should I look straight down the camera lens, or should the reporter tell me where to look in order to do the interview? Is it a live one, or is it going to be recorded and broadcast later? And another thing is, you know, why do they want to speak to you specifically, and will anyone else be in the item? They tend to talk about packages on TV. I don't know whether you've heard that, a package, and what that means is they've collected some shots and some interviews, and they package them all up together. And so you might be in a package about a particular issue where you're not the only voice. It's always good to be on live, because then you can get your message out early, and you're often not edited that way. It's as live is another version where they'll record you and then play out your whole interview without editing it. A pre-record is quite often the sort of, this is jargon, by the way, this is the terminology they might use when they're asking you to do something. A pre-record is one where they'll film an interview with you, and then they'll keep it for later broadcasts. And then this is the one that we're all most familiar with now from watching the TV, a down the line, which means in the old days would mean going to a remote studio and sitting in front of a camera and putting an earpiece in. But all of that's gone now. We're all doing it over Zoom and Skype and what have you. But that's a down the line. So I'm sort of down the line to you now, if you like. Again, here's some sort of steers that might help you when you're doing things in the media. Almost never will you be given the questions in advance. It's not really commonplace. I never did it as a journalist, and if I was ever asked for the questions in advance, I'd say, well, I'm not doing that for the other interviewees, and actually I don't know what I'm going to ask you necessarily, because I don't know what you're going to say to me in reply. More commonly, you're perfectly entitled to say, well, what kind of things are you going to ask me about? What do you want to know about? What's your angle? What's your agenda? And the journalist should give you that, because they shouldn't get you to do an interview under false pretenses, if you like. Again, it's about not relying on the interviewer to ask you the perfect question. So if your answer is something about how brilliantly your school has done about something, you won't really necessarily get asked the perfect question to allow you just to naturally answer that question. So that's where you need to have prepared what you want to say, so that you can lead it by giving the answer that you want to give, almost regardless of the question you're asked, actually. You heard it in Ruth's interview there a little bit, I think, earlier on, where there was quite a lot of bait that Ruth could have potentially risen to in that interview. She didn't rise to any of it, and the easiest way not to is to know what you want to say, and to recognise that again, a journalist's attempt will be to try to get you to say something difficult or controversial or unplanned, and Ruth in that instance was very, very good, I think, at sticking to the messages that we'd agreed and that she wanted and was comfortable with delivering. I love an acronym. So if you're dealing with the press, here's some things just for you to bear in mind. I think I've said it a few times now. Make sure you prepare. If you're prepared, then it's easier to relax. The more relaxed you are, the more natural you'll sound. And that allows your brain just to concentrate a little bit more on what you're supposed to be doing. Examples are great. I've tried to draw a couple of examples out in this presentation here. But the one thing that you've got available to you is direct examples of what's going on in your school right now. So you can quote those without obviously revealing any identities if you're not allowed to, but examples of how you are going about your business or what you're doing in your school really help to underline the points that you're trying to make. I've tried today, and I think you should try to always use simple language. Jargon or long-winded explanations, not so great on the TV or with audiences. And if you get the chance, say it again. If you have a main message that you want to deliver and you're asked 3, 4, 5 questions in an interview, rather than coming up with new and different answers to each of those questions, go back to your main message and say that again. That's never a bad policy. You hear lots of people do that on the TV and the radio all the time. And as school leaders, what have you got in your locker? Well, you've got passion for what you do. You've got, more often than not, the respect, not just of the audience, but also the interviewer, because of the kind of role that you perform in society. You've got expertise and experience to draw on, of many years in some cases. And I often say to people like Ruth, who's been a school leader, you know, if you're talking from experience, you can never be wrong. If it's happening to you, if it's happening in your school, if it's something that you're dealing with right now and you're describing it, that is something that no one can challenge you on, really. Sincerity, it's a quality that I think school leaders have in spades. And of course, you have status. You're one of the leaders in your community, one of the elders, if you like, and most people, most interviewers will respect that ultimately. So again, a couple of easy do's and don'ts, which are similar to the ones I gave earlier on. So I'll just skip over those because I want a little bit of time just to play a little video and then take any questions that anybody might have towards the end. And also, you know, finishing early is never a bad thing these days, is it? So let me just share my final video with you. And this is just another one from Electric Airways, and it's how to speak to different types of journalists. It's 3 minutes. So I just found it really, really interesting when I watched it. And I've used it several times in training, and I hope you'll find it interesting too.
As a PR person, you spend your time getting journalists to interview your spokespeople. But you cannot assume that the journalist understands the story, the product, or the issue. The old days when newsrooms overflowed with expert journalists are gone, even in trade papers. Your expert spokesperson is quite likely to be talking to a 25-year-old journalist who is struggling to understand a wide array of topics on their beat. They don't understand the details and don't have the time to really get to grips with it. Some know their stuff, but others are learning on the job. You need to take account of the journalist's level of knowledge. Most journalists know a little about a lot of things. Their knowledge is a mile wide and an inch deep. Your spokesperson's knowledge is the opposite, an inch wide and a mile deep. For the journalist confronted with something new, a few minutes on Google is often as much research as they can do, even trade journalists. So you don't want your spokesperson to answer the journalist's first question by diving deep into the detail of a product or issue. No matter how obvious it may seem to the spokesperson, it may not be obvious to the journalist. And their reaction will be to try and summarize or interpret what was said. On the basis of their 2 minutes research on Google, you really don't want them to be doing that. Generally speaking, journalists don't write about products and services. They write about how they impact on people. Until it becomes clear the level of a journalist's knowledge, your spokesperson shouldn't look to dazzle a journalist or overwhelm them with jargon. They need to speak in everyday language and relate it to everyday things. Tell them instead a story about the product or issue that is rooted in the experience of real people. More detail can be added once the journalist has engaged with the core story. And think about what matters most to the audience, and therefore to the journalist. The reason that the Times and the Guardian newspapers coexist in serving a professional middle-class readership in the UK is because they are read by two completely different types of professional middle-class readers. Talking to a journalist from different publications about the same issues requires you to flex the story. Your spokesperson needs to communicate differently in the interview if the story is to land positively with the audience. At Electric Airwaves, we serve the needs of communication teams that need their spokespeople to tell their organisation's story in an engaging and compelling way to different types of journalists. How will your next announcement be received?
So there we go. Again, a little bit focused on products and services, because that's typically the sorts of clients that that company serves. But when you think about it in terms of a school context, I still think it translates. Now, I'm very happy with Andy's help to take any questions you guys might have. But I really hope that what I've been able to present to you this morning has been useful. I'm as well as working for NHT, I'm a school governor, and I've been struck just how monumental leaders' efforts have been during the pandemic, and I really hope that NHT is faithfully representing the hard work that's done. And I'm sure that you get plenty of hollow thank yous from people, but just I want to say a sincere one to all of you for all the hard work that you do currently during the pandemic. It really is stunning. I've just spoken to so many school leaders in the last year, and I'm in awe of the work that you do. So if there's anything that I can ever do to help you translate that in the press, then I'd be more than happy to do it. But thank you very much for tuning in, and I do hope it was all useful to you.
Thanks a lot, Stephen. That's really great, really interesting. I really love that last little clip. It reminded me of those old-fashioned public information films about what to do and not to do, and the inch wide, mile deep, and put it across really clearly. Yeah, I'm more than happy for people to come off mute, put their cameras on, ask questions, and practice media training, I suppose. Really being used to talking to a recently former journalist. Who spent more than 2 minutes on Google researching this, I'm sure, and certainly isn't 25.
No. I am actually. I am. I don't look it because of circumstances.
No. You have a lot of care and stress in your life. I understand that to be true. So some useful comments in the chat. People saying thank you and how useful they found it. But yes, please, if people would like to ask anything. Maybe you've got a particular issue at your school, or something you thought went well or didn't go well, you'd like to tell us about, please feel free to do. While you're thinking, I just want to say hello to John Davey, because his camera's been on all the time. So it's a nice office you have there. Hello, John. nice to see you there.
Nice office, yeah.
Yeah, better than mine. I mean, I think just to summarise, I think the main thing you said there is many main things, but don't panic, I think, is the key one. And I think you stuck to that actually during your presentation when you were trying to get your clips running. Just keep doing what you're doing, and people will let you do it. And it might probably felt like an eternity to you, but it's only a minute to us, so that's fine. I quite like the point you made about you don't need to persuade the journalist, you just need to get your point across, because that hadn't really occurred to me, but that's completely right, isn't it? It's getting the message across. I think that came through from the interview with Ruth particularly. One thing with Ruth, her camera was a bit low and you were kind of looking up at her, and I think it's better to have a camera sort of a bit higher than that.
Yeah, interestingly on that one, she was being interviewed on 5 Live, and obviously we know that to be a radio station.
Oh,
so
of course,
I don't think they told her that they were going to put the Envision stuff up as well. So once she's done a few more radio ones since then.
Yeah.
And actually, we've moved her camera position around, and
I've often been told I've got the perfect face for radio. So,
well, I wouldn't. I'm not going to lie, Andy. So I wouldn't argue with you there, but neither have I. Perhaps I'll just, in closing, just say one thing. Actually, typically when I do these face to face, I give everyone my phone number and my email address, because the phone number is an NHT one, and so is the email address. So if you need any media advice anytime, day or night, my number, and I'll put it on the details as well, is 07970 907730. And you can reach me at stephen.george@naht.org.uk. And I really seriously, member subscriptions include the benefit of ringing me up at whatever time of day or night if you need anything. So I'm more than happy to do that.
Oh boy, you're going to regret saying any time of the day.
Fine, but it's a small group. I think I can wear it.
Oh, okay, great. And we'll put that when we email the slides on. We'll put those details around in case you didn't scribble down. Although I saw John Davey writing it down, so you'll be getting a call from him. Yeah, you see, he'll be on your case. Okay. Conscious of time, and everyone's got busy schools to run. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you so much, Stephen, for your presentation. Clear and excellent as ever, and I'm sure people will enjoy the slides. There's a poll if people who care to fill in the poll. If you'd like to get in touch with us, our email is events@nht.org.uk, just the word events at nht.org.uk, and have a look at our website for details of latest membership offers, NHT Wellness and Protect services, and do get in touch if there's any tailored training we can offer you. And just a quick plug, we've got a few courses coming up this week from NHT. Tomorrow we've got a course on an update on Ofsted with Philip Rollerhead, which is always very popular and often oversubscribed actually. On Thursday we've got James Pope talking about head teacher wellness. On the 29th, which is Friday, we've got a course on planning for the future. And on Monday, the 1st of February, we've got another session on wellbeing, this time with Dr. Emma Kell and Adrian Bethune, which I'm sure will be really good because I've seen Emma present before, and that will be good and timely for you all. So lots happening, keeping me busy anyway, keeping me in the job. Lots happening in the real world, keeping Stephen George in the job. So that's great. So thank you all for your time. And Stephen, is there anything you want to say to take us out?
No, all good. But keep on doing what you're doing, because it's a challenging and tough time out there. But goodness knows that the nation needs you at your best. So if there's anything we can ever do to help you, that's what NHT is here for.
Great, perfect. Okay, thanks a lot, Stephen. Thanks so much for
Thank you, everyone.
And we'll see you all again another time. Thanks. Bye now.